Imagine hearing the person you love most in the world, the one you've built a life with, laugh as they tell your child, "Never marry someone like your mom. She'll just drag you down." Now imagine your 13-year-old daughter hearing it, too, and what she does next changes everything. My name is Clara Bennett, and this is the story of how my daughter's courage woke me up. I live in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood in a small Oregon town, the kind of place where kids ride bikes until the streetlights flicker on and neighbors chat over picket fences. To the outside world, I'm the dependable one, always at the school's spring fair, organizing the annual block party, or helping the local library with their summer reading program. I'm the mom who never says no, the wife who keeps the house running, the woman who smiles even when she's crumbling inside. But behind closed doors, I've been fading for years, unnoticed, unappreciated, and, until recently, unable to admit it to myself. My name is Clara Bennett. I'm 38, a mother to my 13-year-old daughter, Elise, and a wife to my husband, Nathan, a man who can charm a room in seconds, but struggles to see the woman standing right beside him. Nathan is a project manager at a construction firm. Always on the go, always commanding attention with his quick wit and easy grin. When we met in our early 20s, I thought his confidence was the most attractive thing about him. He made me feel like I was the only person in the world who mattered. But over the years, that light in his eyes dimmed when he looked at me, replaced by a distracted gaze, as if I were a piece of furniture he'd grown used to. Elise, though, she's my anchor. She's 13, with a sharp mind and a quiet strength that catches you off guard. She's the kind of girl who doesn't talk much but sees everything. She notices the way I rush to make dinner after a long day, the way Nathan barely looks up from his phone when I speak, the way I sometimes sit, alone in the living room after they've both gone to bed, staring at the wall, trying to remember who I used to be. Elise has her father's hazel eyes, but her heart, it's all her own, big and fierce and unflinchingly honest. It was a chilly Saturday evening in late September when everything unraveled. Nathan had invited some of his coworkers over for a casual get-together, drinks, snacks, and a football game on the TV. I'd spent the day preparing, as I always do. I vacuumed the living room, scrubbed the kitchen counters until they gleamed, and put together a spread of appetizers, homemade, spinach dip, a charcuterie board, and Nathan's favorite garlic bread. I wanted everything to be perfect, even though I knew I wouldn't be part of the laughter in the next room. I never am. I'm the one who sets the stage, then fades into the background. The guests arrived around 6 p.m., their voices filling the house with a warmth I wasn't part of. I smiled, welcomed them, offered drinks, and then retreated to the kitchen to tidy up. I could hear Nathan in the living room, his voice louder than the rest, cracking jokes, making everyone laugh. It's a sound I used to love. But lately, it's felt like a reminder of how far apart we've grown. I was rinsing a plate in the sink when I heard it. Nathan's voice, sharp and careless, cutting through the chatter. I told Elise the other day, he said, a chuckle in his tone. "Never marry someone like your mom. She'll just drag you down." The room erupted in laughter, deep and unrestrained, as if he'd just told the funniest joke of the night. "I mean it," he continued, his voice slurring slightly from the beers he'd had. "All she does is fuss over the house and plan. Little events. No ambition, no spark. Just a drain on your energy." My hands froze under the running water. The plate slipped from my fingers, clattering into the sink, but I barely noticed. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears, drowning out the laughter from the next room. I stared at the faucet, the water streaming down, and for a moment I couldn't move. It wasn't just the words that hurt. It was the ease with which he said them, the way he turned me into a punchline, a cautionary tale for our daughter. The same man who'd held me close after a miscarriage 8 years ago, who'd whispered promises of forever, was now reducing me to a joke in front of his friends. I didn't cry. I didn't storm into the living room and confront him. I just stood there, the weight of his words pressing down on me like a physical force. I felt small, smaller than I ever had, as if I were shrinking into the linoleum floor. What hurt more than the insult was the realization that this wasn't new. Nathan had been pulling away for years, his affection replaced by indifference, his compliments by criticism. I'd been telling myself it was stress, that he was just tired from work, that if I tried harder, loved more, he'd come back to me. But in that moment, I knew he'd already checked out. What I didn't know then was that Elise had hurt him too. She'd been upstairs in her room, headphones on, working on a school project, but she'd come down to grab a glass of water, just in time to hear her father's words. She stood at the bottom of the stairs, out of sight, her small hands clenched into fists, her heart breaking for me in a way I couldn't yet fathom. She didn't come to me right away. She didn't cry or scream. She waited, her mind turning over what she'd heard, her resolve hardening with every second. For years, I'd been carrying the weight of our family on my shoulders, convincing myself that my role was to keep the peace, to be the glue that held us together. I gave up my career as a graphic designer to stay home with Elise after she was born. It wasn't the plan. I'd loved my job, loved the rush of creating something beautiful from nothing. But Nathan's job demanded long hours, and we couldn't afford childcare on top of our mortgage. So I stepped back, telling myself it was temporary, that I'd go back to work when Elise was older. But temporary turned into years, and I became someone I barely recognized. Just mom, just wife, just a shadow of the woman I used to be. Nathan wasn't always like this. When we met, he was vibrant, attentive, the kind of man who'd leave little notes on my pillow just to make me smile. But after Elise came, something shifted. Maybe it was the pressure of providing for a family, or maybe he just grew bored of me. His compliments turned into questions. "Why don't you do something with your day?" And his attention turned to his phone, his work, anything but me. I kept trying, kept loving him, hoping he'd see me again. But he didn't. And now, he'd made it clear to everyone else that he never would. I turned off the faucet, my hands trembling, and leaned against the counter. I wanted to disappear, to crawl into bed and pretend I hadn't heard him. But I couldn't. Not with a house full of guests, not with Elise upstairs, not with the life I'd built still demanding I show up. So I stayed in the kitchen, wiping down counters that were already clean, trying to hold myself together. I didn't know that Elise was already planning to do what I couldn't, to speak the truth and make everyone listen. Before that night, before Elise's voice sliced through the noise of our home, I'd been living in a state of quiet erosion. From the outside, our life looked picture perfect. We had a cozy house with a wraparound porch, a garden I tended to obsessively, and a tabby cat named Luna who curled up at the foot of Elise's bed every night. Neighbors smiled at me when I walked Elise to the bus stop each morning, and I always smiled back, even when I felt like I was drowning inside. I baked cookies for the school bake sale, planned Elise's birthday parties with every detail accounted for, and made sure Nathan's work shirts were always pressed. But behind our front door, I was a ghost in my own life, present, but unseen. Nathan wasn't always distant. When we met, he was magnetic. He'd take me on spontaneous drives to the coast, just the two of us, laughing over the sound of the waves. He'd look at me like I was the most fascinating person he'd ever met, like he couldn't believe his luck. But after Elise was born, the man who once couldn't keep his hands off me became someone who barely noticed I was there. I gave up my career to raise Elise, a decision that felt right at the time but slowly chipped away at my sense of self. I became mom, a role I loved, but one that swallowed me whole. Nathan's comments didn't help. "What do you even do all day?" he'd ask, as if raising our daughter and running our home wasn't enough. Elise, though, she saw me. From the time she could talk, she'd say things that made my heart ache with gratitude. "You're the best mom ever," she'd tell me. Her voice so earnest I couldn't help but believe her. She'd sit with me while I gardened, handing me bulbs to plant, her small hands covered in dirt. She'd draw pictures of our family, me with a big smile, Nathan with his phone, and herself in the middle, holding us together. Elise didn't just love me, she admired me, and I held on to that like a lifeline. Nathan's love, on the other hand, felt like it came with terms. He'd praise me in front of others. "Clara's the best, isn't she?" But when we were alone, he'd criticize. "Why don't you go back to work?" he'd say, as if I hadn't given up my career. "For our family. You're always so busy, but what for?" I wanted to scream, "I'm keeping this family together." But I didn't. I swallowed my frustration, my hurt, because fighting with Nathan only made things worse. It made the silences longer, the distance wider. So I kept showing up, kept trying, kept hoping he'd remember the woman he fell in love with. Elise noticed the changes in Nathan long before I admitted them to myself. She saw the way he dismissed me, the way he'd cut me off when I tried to share something about my day. She noticed how I'd serve dinner, and he wouldn't say thank you. How I'd sit next to him on the couch, and he'd shift away, his eyes glued to his phone. One evening, I found a drawing she'd left on the kitchen table. 3 stick figures labeled Mom, Dad, and me. I had a heart over my chest. Nathan was holding his phone, and Elise stood between us, her arms outstretched, as if trying to bridge the gap. That drawing broke my heart more than any of Nathan's words ever could. By the time that Saturday night rolled around, I was exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally. I was tired of pretending, tired of hoping, tired of being invisible. I'd lit a few vanilla candles in the living room to make the house feel cozy for Nathan's guests, even though I knew I wouldn't be part of their night. I never was. I was the one who set the table, poured the drinks, and then disappeared. Nathan had invited 3 of his coworkers over, guys I'd met a few times but never really connected with. They were loud, brash, the kind of men who bonded over sports and crude jokes. I spent the afternoon preparing, making sure everything was just right, while Nathan popped in and out of the kitchen, asking where the whiskey was and telling me not to overdo it with the snacks. He said it with a smirk, like my effort was something to mock. The guests arrived, and I played my role, smiling, offering drinks, setting out the appetizers I'd spent hours preparing. Nathan barely looked at me. I could hear him in the living room, launching into stories about work, his voice booming, his laughter louder than anyone else's. I stayed in the kitchen, wiping down counters that didn't need wiping, trying to keep myself busy. It was safer that way, staying out of sight, staying invisible. That's when I heard Nathan's words, the ones that stopped me cold. I told Elise the other day, "Never marry someone like your mom. She'll just drag you down." The laughter that followed felt like a punch to the gut. I stood there, gripping the edge of the counter, my mind racing. I wanted to believe I'd misheard him, but I hadn't. He'd said it so casually, so easily, as if I were nothing more than a joke to him. I turned off the kitchen light and slipped upstairs, my legs shaky, my chest tight. I sat on the edge of our bed, staring at the floor, trying to process what I'd heard. 10 minutes passed, maybe 20. I don't know. Time felt heavy, sluggish, like I was moving through molasses. Then I heard the stairs creak. Elise appeared, in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes wide with a mix of anger and concern. "Mom," she said softly. "Are you okay?" I tried to smile, but it felt forced, brittle. "Yeah, sweetie, just tired." She stared at me, her gaze piercing, And then she stepped closer, wrapping her arms around me. "I heard what Dad said," she whispered. I closed my eyes, my heart sinking. What do you say to your child when their father turns you into a warning? When the person they're supposed to look up to tears you down? I didn't know how to respond, so I just held her, my arms tight around her small frame. "Does he really think you're a drag?" she asked, her voice small but steady. "No," I said too quickly. "He was just being silly, trying to make his friends laugh." Elise pulled back, looking me in the eye. She didn't say anything, but I could see the shift in her, a quiet determination, a clarity I hadn't seen before. "Okay," she said finally. "I'm going to go downstairs." I started to protest. "Elise, wait." But she was already at the door. She turned to me one last time. "I'm just going to say something," she said. "It won't be bad. I promise." And then she was gone. I stood at the top of the stairs, my breath shallow, my hand gripping the banister so tightly my knuckles turned white. I could hear the laughter drifting up from the living room, Nathan's voice louder than the rest, as if he were trying to prove something to his friends. It was a sound I used to love, a sound that once made me feel safe, loved. Now it made my stomach churn. I stayed out of sight, my heart pounding, torn between following Elise and staying hidden, like I always did. But deep down, I knew something was about to happen, something Nathan and his friends weren't ready for. Elise has always been quiet, the kind of child who listens more than she speaks. She's never been one for tantrums or outbursts. When she talks, it's deliberate, thoughtful, sometimes startlingly honest. She got that from me, I think, though I'd lost that part of myself somewhere along the way, buried under years of trying to keep everyone else happy. Nathan never saw it coming, never expected that our 13-year-old daughter would be the one to hold a mirror up to his words and make him see the damage he'd done. I heard her voice before I saw her. "Can I say something?" she asked, her tone soft but firm, cutting through the noise of the living room like a knife. The laughter stopped abruptly, the room falling silent. I edged down one step, just enough to see into the living room without being seen. Elise stood in the middle of the room, her hands clasped in front of her, her expression calm but resolute. Nathan was sitting on the couch, a beer in his hand, his face a mix of confusion and amusement. One of his friends, a guy named Mike, chuckled. "Sure, kiddo," he said, clearly expecting something cute or funny. But Elise wasn't smiling. She looked straight at Nathan, her hazel eyes unwavering. "If Mom's such a drag," she said, her voice steady, "then why do you always ask her to fix everything when you mess up at work? Why do you tell her you don't know what you'd do without her when you think I'm not listening?" The room went still, the kind of silence that feels like it's holding its breath. Nathan's jaw tightened, his eyes widening, the beer in his hand suddenly looking out of place. Elise wasn't done. "I heard what you said earlier," she continued, her voice clear, unshaken. "You told your friends not to marry someone like Mom, that she drags you down. But Mom's the one who makes sure you have clean clothes for work. She's the one who makes sure I don't hear you yelling on the phone with your boss. She's the reason this house feels like a home. Because if it weren't for her, it'd just be a mess." She paused, her gaze never leaving Nathan's. "I love you, Dad," she added, softer now. "But if you think Mom's the problem, you're not paying attention." And just like that, she turned around, walked past Nathan and his stunned friends, and climbed the stairs. When she reached me, she didn't say a word. She just took my hand, squeezed it gently, and then walked to her room, closing the door behind her. I stood there in the stairwell, my eyes burning but dry, a strange mix of emotions swirling inside me. I wasn't angry anymore, wasn't even hurt. I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Pride, not for myself, but for Elise, for her bravery, for her clarity. Downstairs, Nathan tried to recover. "She's just a kid," he stammered, his voice shaky. "She doesn't know what she's talking about." But no one was laughing anymore. Mike, the coworker who'd chuckled earlier, leaned forward, his expression serious. "I think she does, man," he said quietly. I didn't go back downstairs. I didn't clean up the empty beer bottles or offer dessert or play the perfect hostess. I went to Elise's room, knocked softly, and stepped inside. She was sitting on her bed, reading a book, as if nothing had happened. "You okay?" I asked. She looked up, nodded, and said, "Yeah. Are you?" I smiled, really smiled, for the first time in weeks. "I think I'm getting there," I said. The next morning, the house was quiet, but it wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was the kind that follows a storm, heavy and tense. There were empty bottles on the coffee table, a half-eaten tray of appetizers on the counter, and the faint smell of whiskey lingering in the air. Nathan was already up, pacing the kitchen with a mug of coffee, pretending nothing had happened. But something had, and there was no ignoring the fact that our daughter had just shattered the illusion we'd all been living under. I walked into the kitchen, still in my robe, and went straight to the kettle to make tea. Nathan cleared his throat, like he wanted to say something but didn't know how to start. "Clara," he said finally, "about last night." I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. His voice was heavy with the weight of someone who'd run out of excuses. "I was drunk," he said. "I was just joking around. You know how guys talk when they're trying to be funny." I turned to face him, my expression calm but firm. "No, Nathan," I said. "I don't know. Because when I talk about you to other people, I don't make you the punchline." He sighed, setting his mug down with a thud. "You're making this a bigger deal than it is," he said. "She's a kid. She doesn't understand the pressure I'm under. You don't even work." I cut him off, my voice sharp. "Don't go there. Not after everything." There was a long silence. Nathan looked at me, really looked at me, and I could see the panic in his eyes. Not because he felt guilty, but because he realized he was losing control of the narrative he thought he'd mastered. "I didn't mean what I said," he said weakly. "Yes, you did," I replied. "You meant it, and you've meant it for a long time. You just didn't think anyone would call you out on it." He rubbed his face with both hands, muttering, something I couldn't hear, but I didn't care. I was done managing his feelings, done making excuses for him. Elise came downstairs a few minutes later, her backpack slung over one shoulder, ready for school. She didn't say much, just nodded, when I handed her lunch and kissed me on the cheek. But before she left, she turned to Nathan and said, "You don't have to lie, Dad. We heard what you said. Just don't say it again. Not about her." Then she walked out the door, calm and composed, stronger than either of us. Later that day, Nathan texted me from work. Long messages about how sorry he was, how he didn't realize how distant we'd become, how he was stressed and tired and didn't mean any of it. But the truth was, he did. Drunk words are often sober thoughts, and what Elise had done didn't just expose Nathan's cruelty. It exposed my silence. For years I'd let things slide, telling myself I was being strong, being patient, being the bigger person. But I was teaching Elise something dangerous, that it's okay to let someone diminish your worth if they call it love. That night, after dinner, Nathan came into our bedroom. He didn't walk in with his usual confidence, that charming grin he used to win people over. He looked tired, defeated. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice low. "Maybe we should try counseling." I nodded slowly. "Maybe you should," I said. "I've already started." He blinked, caught off guard. "You have?" he asked. "Last month," I said. Elise and I have been seeing someone. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, searching for words. You didn't tell me, he said finally. I met his gaze, unflinching. Why would I? You haven't asked how I'm doing in over a year. For the first time in our marriage, Nathan didn't have a comeback. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, the same way I had the night before. He was unraveling, not because of what I'd said, but because of what Elise had seen, what she'd named. Elise didn't yell or argue. She told the truth, and left Nathan to sit in the silence of it. That, more than anything, was the beginning of something we couldn't ignore. The days after that night didn't erupt into chaos. There were no screaming matches, no dramatic exits. Instead, things got quieter, heavier, like the house was holding its breath. Nathan didn't bring up Elise's words again. Not directly. But I could feel the shift in him. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a cautiousness I hadn't seen in years. He started coming home earlier, asking if I needed anything when he went out. Small gestures he hadn't made in a long time. But it didn't change what was already broken. Not for... Media Elise, on the other hand, didn't dwell on that night. She didn't need to. Her words had done what mine never could. They'd pierced through the facade, not just Nathan's, but mine too. That week, I did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled out my old sketchbooks and pencils from a box in the garage. I'd packed them away when Elise was a toddler, telling myself I didn't have time for drawing anymore. But that day, I sat at the kitchen table and let myself create. Not for anyone else, just for me. The lines were shaky, the colors uneven, but it felt like coming home. Elise peeked into the kitchen while I was sketching. She didn't say anything at first, just watched me work. Then she smiled, a small, knowing smile. You look different, she said. I laughed softly. Different how? Like you're lighter, she said. And maybe I was. Elise and I started spending more time together after that. We'd take walks in the evening, just the two of us, talking about school, books, or sometimes nothing, at all. Even the silences between us felt full, like they were holding space for something new, something healing. I didn't make any big announcements to Nathan. I didn't demand change or give him ultimatums. I just started living my life without waiting for his approval. When he asked if I wanted to go out for dinner one night, I said no, not out of anger, but because I didn't feel like pretending. Instead, I gave him the name of the therapist Elise and I were seeing. If you want to do the work, I said, start there. To my surprise, he did. Therapy didn't change Nathan overnight, but it opened a door, one I'd thought was locked forever. He started showing up differently, asking questions, listening, really listening. For the first time in years, I let myself be honest with him. I told him about the resentment I'd buried, the loneliness I'd felt, the exhaustion of trying to be everything for everyone. I told him that what hurt the most wasn't the joke he'd made, but the truth behind it. That he'd started seeing me as a burden rather than a partner, and I told him I'd never be that again. We didn't separate, not officially, but we created space. Nathan moved into the guest room and we called it a reset, not for the marriage, but for ourselves. Elise thrived in that space. She seemed lighter, more confident, like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. One evening she handed me a drawing, just like she used to when she was little. It was the same 3 figures, Mom, Dad, and me, but this time we were all holding hands, small hearts above each of us. Is this how you feel now? I asked, my voice soft. She nodded. We're still figuring things out, she said, but at least now we're not pretending. That drawing is on the fridge. The weeks following Elise's confrontation with Nathan brought a shift that was both subtle and profound. The house, once filled with unspoken tension, now carried a different kind of stillness, one that felt less like avoidance and more like a pause, a space to breathe. Nathan's attempts to mend things were cautious, almost tentative. He'd come home with takeout some nights, asking if I wanted to eat together, or he'd offer to take Luna for a walk, something he hadn't done since she was a puppy. It was progress, but it wasn't enough to erase the years of neglect or the sting of his words that night. I, too, was changing. That first sketch I'd made after pulling out my old supplies sparked something in me I thought I'd lost. I started, spending more time in the garage, turning it into a makeshift studio. The air smelled of paint and turpentine, a scent that brought back memories of my old life as a graphic designer. I wasn't creating for anyone else, no clients, no deadlines, just for the sheer joy of it. Elise would join me sometimes, sitting on an old stool with her own sketchbook, her pencils scratching against the paper as we worked in companionable silence. Those moments felt like a gift, a reclaiming of something I'd given up too easily. One afternoon, while I was blending colors on a canvas, Elise looked up from her drawing and said, "You should show these to someone, Mom." I laughed, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "They're not perfect," I said, gesturing to the uneven lines and bold strokes. "They don't have to be," she replied, her voice earnest. "They're yours." Her words stuck with me, nudging me toward a decision I hadn't considered in years. The next day, I contacted a local art collective about hosting a small exhibit. It wasn't about fame or money. It was about remembering who I was before. I became just mom and wife. Nathan noticed the change too. One evening, he stood in the doorway of the garage watching me paint. "You're different," he said, his tone hesitant. I didn't stop working, just kept brushing color onto the canvas. "Different how?" I asked, echoing Elise's question. He shifted uncomfortably. "Happier, I guess. More you." I didn't respond right away, letting the silence stretch between us. Finally, I set my brush down and looked at him. "I'm trying to find myself again," I said. "I've been lost for a long time." He nodded, his eyes dropping to the floor, and I could see he was grappling with something. Guilt, maybe, or the realization that he'd contributed to that loss. Therapy became a regular part of our lives. Elise and I continued our sessions, and to my surprise, Nathan joined us a few times. It wasn't easy. The first session was awkward, filled with long pauses and half-formed apologies from Nathan. But over time, he started opening up, about the pressure at work, the fear of not being enough, the way he'd let resentment build toward me without realizing it. I listened, and for the first time, I spoke honestly too. I told him how I'd felt invisible, how his words that night had been the tip of an iceberg of neglect. I told him I wasn't sure I could go back to the way things were, but I was willing to see if we could build something new. Elise watched us navigate this new terrain with a quiet maturity that amazed me. She didn't interfere, but her presence was a steady reminder of why we were trying. One night, after a particularly tough therapy session, she handed me another drawing. It was a picture of the three of us standing in front of our house, the garden blooming around us. Above each figure was a small star, hers, mine, and Nathan's. "Stars are different," she explained, "but they all shine." I hung it on the fridge next to the last drawing, a symbol of hope amid the uncertainty. Work began to creep back into my life too. The art collective accepted my proposal, and I spent my days preparing pieces for the exhibit, scheduled for mid-June. I'd wake early, sketching in the soft morning light, feeling a sense of purpose I hadn't known in years. Nathan started, pitching in more at home, cooking dinner, helping Elise with her homework. Small acts that felt like steps toward partnership rather than obligation. It wasn't a fairy tale reconciliation, but it was a start. One Saturday, as I was framing a painting, Nathan approached me with a hesitant smile. "I'd like to come to your exhibit," he said. "If that's okay." I studied him for a moment, searching for sincerity. "It's okay," I said finally. "But it's not about you. It's about me." He nodded, accepting the boundary, and I felt a flicker of relief. Maybe, just maybe, we could find a way forward. Not as we were, but as we could be. The art exhibit arrived faster than I expected, a whirlwind of nerves and excitement. The small gallery downtown was filled with local artists, their work lining the walls in a vibrant display. My pieces, abstract landscapes and portraits of Elise and Luna, were hung in a corner, modest but striking. Friends and neighbors showed up, their compliments warming me in a way I hadn't anticipated. Elise was there, beaming with pride, and Nathan stood off to the side, watching quietly. When I gave a short talk about my journey, my voice trembled, but I spoke from the heart. About losing myself, about finding my way back through art, about the strength I'd drawn from my daughter. Afterward, Nathan approached me, a rare vulnerability in his eyes. "I'm proud of you," he said, his voice low. "I haven't said that enough." I nodded, accepting the words but not clinging to them. "Thank you," I said. "It means something, but we've got a long way to go." He agreed, and we left it at that, a fragile truce in the making. The months that followed were a slow rebuilding. Nathan continued therapy on his own, and I expanded my art sessions into a weekly class for the community. Elise thrived, her confidence growing as she saw me reclaim my identity. We didn't become the perfect family. There were still tense moments, still work to do, but we were honest with each other, and that made all the difference. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Elise leaned against me. "We're okay, aren't we?" she asked. I smiled, wrapping an arm around her. "Yeah, sweetie, we're getting there." The house felt different now, less like a stage for pretending and more like a home where we could be real. Nathan and I didn't move back into the same bedroom, but we started talking again, really talking, about our fears, our hopes, our mistakes. It wasn't love as it once was, but it was respect, a foundation to build on. I started painting again, not just for myself but for others, offering art therapy sessions to those who felt as lost as I once had. As I look back, I realize Elise saved me in a way I couldn't save myself. Her courage that night wasn't just a defense of me. It was a call to wake up, to see my worth, to choose myself. And I did. I'm not the burden Nathan once painted me to be. I'm the backbone, the one who held us together when he couldn't see it. My worth isn't up for debate, not anymore. If this story moved you, please like the video to help it reach others who need to hear it. Share it with someone who might see themselves in it, and leave a comment below. Have you ever felt unseen? In your own home? Let's talk about it. Let's support each other. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you never miss the next story. Thanks for being here, and always remember, you are enough.